Hello everyone, I am the Whispering Knight. And tonight hello everyone, I am the Whispering Knight. And tonight, I will lead you through shadows. But before the darkness deepens, hope you guys help me with this, like the video, and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it now? Now, draw the curtains. Let your body rest. Because what follows is a story you must hear before sleep. One of hidden doors, of whispers that crawl beneath the floorboards, and of a house that remembered too much. Act I, The Discovery. 1. The whisper beneath the floorboards. They say houses remember. Not in the way people do, with thoughts and words and memory. But with silence. With rot. With creaking that continues long after the wind has passed. I had lived in the Victorian for 3 years. It stood alone on Holleridge Lane, a place too proud to collapse, and too burdened to change. The inheritance was sudden. My grandmother died in her sleep, a note on the nightstand, untouched soup on the stove. She left me the house, her library, and nothing else. I was a software engineer. A man of algorithms and logic trees. I believed in servers, not spirits. But the house. It breathed. And it listened. 2. The attic's breath. It began with a stain. October's breath had turned the air crisp, and one afternoon, I noticed a shadow blooming on my bedroom ceiling. It looked like a thought, dark, slow, and spreading. I followed it. The attic door had never been opened. The ladder extended like a spine, groaning under my weight as I climbed. The air was old. Amber light filtered through a single window smeared with time. There, among cobwebs and forgotten Christmas wreaths, I found them. 2 brass rods. Tarnished but elegant. Resting in a velvet-lined case that looked untouched. The moment I touched them, my hands went cold. A shiver that had nothing to do with the autumn air. I brought them downstairs. And the house began to change. 3. The movement. I sat with the rods that night. Wine warming on the table beside me. The fireplace pulsed faintly. I held them loosely, as I'd seen in documentaries and dusty films. They began to move. No sudden jerk. No ghostly hand. Just a subtle, deliberate crossing, pointing toward the far wall. Toward my grandmother's armoire. A coincidence, I told myself. Subconscious movements. Muscle memory. Trickery. But as I stepped forward, the rods followed. They crossed tightly as I stood before the furniture. Demanding. I pushed. The armoire shifted. Easier than it should have. Behind it, wallpaper that didn't match. Roses, faded and strange. And a seam. Thin. Hidden. I touched it. The wall opened. 4. The safe. A cavity in the wall. A safe, small and old. Built like a mouth caught mid-screen. Its dial gleamed. Brass. Smooth. Untouched. I took a photo of the serial number. Then spent 2 hours digging through forums. 1940s, obscure manufacturer. Forgotten. But one user, Gravestone Collector, shared a default combination. Left to 10. Right to 25. Left to 16. The lock clicked. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, tied with a white ribbon gone gray, were dozens of letters. Each envelope addressed in my mother's script. All sent to the same person, Rebecca Chin Martinez. My heart sank. I knew that name. Act 2, The Letters. 1. Ink and dust. The letters smelled like time. That particular scent of brittle pages, perfume long faded, and secrets folded too many times. I didn't open them all at once. I couldn't. The first envelope trembled in my hand. Addressed to someone I hadn't seen since I was a child. Rebecca Chen Martinez. She had been there once. At a birthday party. Or maybe a funeral. My memory stuttered around her. I opened the letter. Rebecca, if you're reading this, then perhaps the house has begun to speak to you as it once did to me. I stopped. The writing was unmistakably my mother's. But the words, they were not the mother I remembered. They were scared. Urgent. Unsteady. The letter spoke of dreams. Of voices in the walls. Of a mirror that should never be uncovered. Do not trust the child with no face, it said. If the dowsing rods move on their own, leave immediately. I kept reading. Each letter was worse than the last. Mentions of rituals. Of mirrors that showed not reflections but reminders. Of a figure in the hallway only she could see. Rebecca never wrote back. Or if she did, her letters weren't in the safe. But my mother kept writing. As if writing alone kept something at bay. 2. The name. I searched her name that night. Rebecca Chen Martinez. A few hits. A missing person case, 30 years ago. Last seen in our town. A picture, blurry and washed in sepia. It was her. The woman I had seen in the background of a childhood photo. Standing too far back to belong. She had vanished. Just like that. I looked again at the letters. The last one dated the year before my mother died. Written in shaking script. I see you, Rebecca. Even now. Your face changes, but your eyes do not. Why did you come back? Act 3, The Voices. 1. Between the Walls. It began with whispers. Not words, exactly, more like syllables that forgot what they were. Soft enough that I thought it was the pipes. But at night, they grew clearer. Not louder. Clearer. I heard my name once. A whisper, behind the drywall, in the crawlspace no one ever entered. It said, "Come back." I froze. The heating wasn't on. The house was utterly still. Yet beneath the silence, a rhythm, like breath behind plaster. And then, the sound of something small scuttling. Not a rat. Too smooth. Too purposeful. I pressed my ear to the wall. Nothing. But later that night, in my sleep, I dreamed of the wallpaper. It peeled like skin. Revealing eyes that blinked in unison. I woke up screaming. But I wasn't alone. 2. The radio. I found the old radio in the attic the next day. It hadn't been touched in decades. Dust lay thick over its tuning dial. When I plugged it in, static. Then, a woman's voice. "You brought it down, didn't you?" I pulled the plug. Dead silence. No power. But the voice had been real. It had said you. It had known. Later that evening, as I passed the living room, the rods, they moved on their own. They pointed to the basement door. 3. The basement door. I had always hated the basement. Even before all of this. The light at the top of the stairs never worked, and shadows clung to the corners like vines. But I descended, rod in hand. Each step creaked like a warning. At the bottom, darkness. So absolute it felt solid. The air smelled like earth and iron. Then, a whisper, directly behind me. Rebecca never left. I turned. Nothing. But the air had changed. Heavy. Watching. In the corner, half buried in dust, was a mirror. Not just old, ancient. Wrapped in a shroud, tied with a crimson cord. And taped to the frame, in my mother's handwriting. "Do not uncover until the voices stop." I stood in the dark, the mirror breathing in silence. And I knew. The voices had only just begun. Act 4, The Mirror Rituals. 1. The reflection that waited. I stared at the mirror for hours. Not into it. At it. It was wrapped in cloth so tightly that the fabric trembled as if trying to contain what lay beneath. The note from my mother remained, "Do not uncover until the voices stop." But they hadn't stopped. If anything, they'd grown clearer. They spoke in my voice now. "Look," they said. "Just a little." That night, I dreamed of the mirror unwrapped. Of a reflection that wasn't mine. It smiled. And whispered, "Don't forget who you were before the house." 2. The unwrapping. I waited 3 days. And then I couldn't wait any longer. It was nearly midnight. The basement colder than it should have been. I untied the crimson cord. Slowly. The cloth fell away in folds. The mirror was flawless. Silver-backed. Heavy. But what it showed was not the basement. Not entirely. The figure that stood in the reflection wore my clothes. But its hands were too long. Its eyes, deep pools of gray. And behind it, a child. Faceless. Watching. When I moved, the reflection hesitated. And then moved too. But not in sync. It was not a mirror. It was a window. 3. The instructions. Behind the mirror frame, folded between layers of wood, I found another note. Older. Yellowed. The mirror is not a thing, it is a path. Only light can reveal the shadow that clings. There were symbols drawn around the margins. A crude circle. Candles. Blood. A ritual. A ritual meant to sever what had attached itself. I prepared it. Chalk, candles, silence. I stood before the mirror. "Reveal," I said. The mirror pulsed. A ripple. And then, it opened. Not literally. But my body felt like it had fallen through the glass. I stood on the other side. And the house was there. But wrong. Warped. Its walls bled with memory. And every mirror in the house showed something else entirely. Act V, The Descent. 1. The other house. This version of the house had no time. No clocks. No day. Just a bleeding sky outside and walls that pulsed. I wandered through it, barefoot. The mirrors whispered. They showed me things that never happened, or hadn't yet. My mother. Rebecca. Myself, aging, decaying. In one mirror, the child without a face stood beside me. Its hand in mine. I screamed. But the house didn't echo. It absorbed sound like a grave. 2. Rebecca's room. At the top of the stairs, a room I never noticed in the real house. Her room. Rebecca's. It was untouched. Preserved. A bed with no wrinkles. Books on the shelf with her name scribbled in childish handwriting. And on the walls, photographs. Of me. 100 different versions of me. Laughing. Sleeping. Crying. Some aged beyond recognition. Others, from years that hadn't happened yet. I was not the first. I was not the last. 3. The final letter. In her desk drawer, one final envelope. Unsealed. My mother's writing. If you've come this far, you must choose. You cannot save the house. It feeds on memory, on loops. You are either its prisoner, or its warden. If you stay, you keep it sleeping. If you leave, it wakes. And it remembers the world. The mirror behind me shimmered. A door. The house groaned. It knew. And the faceless child waited at the threshold. I stepped forward. And I chose. My mother spoke in hushed, urgent tones on the phone. When I asked who she was talking to, her face had gone pale. She told me firmly that some conversations were not for children. But I had heard the name. I had asked about it later. My mother had been adamant, she had no other children. Had never had any other children. Would never speak of this again. Yet here was evidence to the contrary. Carefully preserved and hidden away, like a shameful secret. The first letter was brief. Formal. The handwriting younger, but unmistakably my mother's. It spoke of apologies and explanations, of mistakes made, and opportunities lost. But as I read deeper into the chronology, the tone shifted. The letters became longer, more intimate. Filled with details about my childhood, my achievements, my struggles. My mother had been telling this Rebecca about me for years. Sharing the story of the son she'd kept, while writing to the daughter she'd given away. By the time I reached the final letter, dated just months before my mother's stroke, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the paper. In it, my mother wrote about her growing illness, her fear that she would die before making things right. She promised to leave clues, to ensure that Rebecca and I would find each other, eventually. She mentioned the safe, the location, even the dowsing rod she'd placed in the attic, a sort of mystical breadcrumb trail. But it was the last paragraph that sent ice through my veins. He doesn't know about you yet, but he will. When the time comes, when the house calls to him, he'll understand. You'll both understand. The passage between our worlds has always been thin here. I've felt you watching, Rebecca. I've heard you calling. Soon, you'll be able to answer. I read those words 3 times before their implication truly sank in. Watching. Calling. The passage between worlds. That night, I left the letters spread across my kitchen table and tried to sleep. But the house wouldn't let me. Every settling timber sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind through the eaves, like whispered conversations. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, I heard it for the first time, a voice. Thin and metallic. Echoing through the plumbing, like sound traveling through tin cans connected by string. Passage. The words seemed to bounce through the walls, traveling from the kitchen pipes, to the bathroom, then down to the basement, and back up through the heating ducts. I lay in bed, muscles rigid, telling myself it was the water heater. The expansion and contraction of metal. Anything but what my rational mind refused to accept. The next night, it happened again. And the night after that. Always the same word. Always the same metallic timbre, as if someone were speaking directly into the plumbing system. During the day, I threw myself into research. Scouring online databases for any record of Rebecca Chin Martinez. I found traces. A birth certificate that matched the time frame. Adoption records that had been sealed. A paper trail that led nowhere, and everywhere at once. But it was the photographs that finally broke me. I found them in an old newspaper archive. A society page from 15 years ago, featuring local college graduates. There she was. Rebecca Chin Martinez. Accepting some academic award. The resemblance was undeniable, the same dark hair I'd inherited from our mother. The same sharp jawline. Even the same slightly asymmetrical smile that had always made me self-conscious in photographs. She existed. She was real. And according to the accompanying article, she died in a car accident. 3 days after the photo was taken. The voice in the pipes grew stronger after that discovery. No longer content with single words. It began to form sentences. Messages that seemed directed specifically at me. It told me things about my childhood that only family would know. Recalled conversations I'd had with my mother in this very house. But the voice was wrong, somehow distorted. Not just by its metallic medium, but by something else. An otherworldly quality that made my skin crawl. By the end of the week, I could feel her presence everywhere. In the corners of my vision, I caught glimpses of movement that vanished when I turned to look. The temperature in certain rooms dropped without explanation. And more than once, I found myself speaking aloud to the empty air, responding to a presence I couldn't see, but could no longer deny. I could no longer deny it. The rational part of me, the engineer who dealt in concrete realities and measurable phenomena, insisted this was grief. Delayed mourning for the mother I'd lost. Guilt over the sister I'd never known existed. Isolation and stress manifesting as auditory hallucinations. But another part, a deeper part that had always known something was missing from our family story, recognized the truth. She was here. She had always been here. Watching. From whatever space separated the living from the dead. Waiting for someone to open the right door. The safe remained open on my kitchen counter. Its contents now spread across every available surface, birth certificates and death certificates. Adoption papers. School records. A paper reconstruction of a life that had run parallel to mine for 32 years. But among Rebecca's documents, I found something that changed everything. A letter. Addressed to me. Written in her handwriting. Dated the day after her death. The envelope was warm to the touch, as if it had been sitting in sunlight, despite the gray October sky outside. Inside, her message was brief, but devastating. I've been waiting so long to meet you, brother. Mother promised we'd find each other, but she never mentioned it would be like this. The passage she spoke of. It's not a metaphor. It's real. And it's here, in the house. Every night I stand outside the boundaries of your world and call to you. Every night, you hear me. Getting closer. Soon you'll have to decide. Will you let me in? That's when I noticed the temperature. The entire house had grown cold. Not the gradual chill of autumn, but the sudden, bone-deep cold of winter air rushing through an open door. My breath began to fog. The kitchen windows started to frost over, despite the mild evening weather. The voice in the pipes was louder now. No longer distant and metallic, but close. Intimate. As if someone were standing directly beside me, whispering in my ear. It spoke my name. Told me stories about the childhood we should have shared. Described the room she would have had, if our mother had been brave enough to keep us both. And I realized, I was no longer alone in the house. I hadn't been alone for days. She was here. In the spaces between walls. In the gaps between heartbeats. In the passage that connected her world to mine. The dowsing rods had found more than a hidden safe. They had found a doorway. A doorway my mother had somehow opened, and never quite managed to close. Now, as I write this, I can hear her more clearly than ever. She stands behind me as I type. Reading over my shoulder. Occasionally correcting my grammar with a sisterly fondness that should be comforting, but instead fills me with inexplicable dread. The house has become a liminal space. Neither fully mine, nor fully hers. A passage between states of existence that grows thinner with each passing hour. Tomorrow I will have to choose. I can feel the decision approaching, like an inevitable conclusion to an equation I've been solving my entire life. The safe door remains open. Its contents scattered across my kitchen like puzzle pieces. Pieces of a life I'm only now beginning to understand. But there's something else inside now. Something that wasn't there before. A photograph. That shouldn't exist. It shows Rebecca and me as children, standing together in this very house. Smiling at a camera that was never there. In the photograph, we cast only one shadow. The voice whispers my name again. Patient. Persistent. Terrifyingly real. She's been waiting so long to come home. Waiting for someone to complete the passage that will finally reunite our fractured family. But I'm beginning to understand, some doors, once open, can never be closed again. And some families are meant to remain divided by more than just death. The choice is mine. The passage is open. I just don't know anymore. Which side of it I'm supposed to be on. Story 2, the peat fire. The realtor never mentioned the smell. When I first drove up the winding dirt road to the cabin, eucalyptus trees swaying in the highland breeze of San Jaime, I thought I'd found the perfect retirement refuge. 43 years of geological surveys, mineral assessments, and corporate boardrooms had left me craving silence. The little wooden structure perched on what the paperwork called reclaimed agricultural land seemed ideal, isolated enough for solitude, close enough to town for supplies. The smell hit me the moment I stepped out of my truck that first evening in March. Not unpleasant, exactly. But persistent. Rich, loamy earth with an undertone of char, as if someone had been burning peat nearby. I assumed it was seasonal. Maybe farmers preparing fields. The mountains around San Jaime were known for their unique soil composition, after all. That night I built my first fire in the stone hearth. The flames caught eagerly, crackling with the sweet scent of eucalyptus logs I'd bought in town. I fell asleep in my reading chair to the sound of wind through timber, and the comfortable weight of exhaustion from unpacking. I woke to cold darkness and the acrid smell of burnt earth, stronger now, seeping through the floorboards like ground fog. The fire had died completely. Not even embers remained. Strange, considering I'd loaded it well before dozing off. But I was tired. Probably hadn't banked it properly. City habits die hard. The second night I was more careful. I built the fire methodically, the way my father had taught me during our camping trips decades ago: tinder, kindling, carefully arranged logs with enough airflow to sustain the burn. I even set my phone alarm for 3 a.m. to add more wood. The alarm never went off. I woke naturally just before dawn to find the hearthstone cold, filled with ash so fine it looked almost powdery. The smell was stronger, rising from the floor itself now. And for the first time, I noticed something else: the house felt different at night. As if it were settling in ways that defied physics, tiny creaks and sighs that seemed to come from below, rather than above. By the fourth night, I was convinced something was wrong with the chimney. But my inspection revealed no obvious problems, no blockages. No damaged flue liner. No signs of downdraft issues. The firebox looked normal. The damper operated smoothly. Yet every morning brought the same result: dead ashes. And that persistent smell of burnt earth. I called the previous owner. Reached him at a retirement home in Florianopolis. His voice carried a strange hesitation when I mentioned the heating issues. "The fire goes out," he said slowly, as if testing the words. "Yes, it always did that. We used electric heaters mostly. Cheaper than constantly rebuilding fires. But electric heat was expensive, and I bought this place partly to live simply. There had to be a logical explanation. I was a geologist, trained to find rational causes for natural phenomena. Mysterious self-extinguishing fires belonged in campfire stories, not in my retirement. The breakthrough came when I decided to dig a well. The town water was clean, but heavily chlorinated. And I missed the pure taste of groundwater. Besides, the physical work would be good for me. And I was curious about the local geology. I chose a spot 30 yards from the cabin where the land seemed most stable. The first few feet revealed typical highland soil, dark, rich humus with good drainage. But at about 4 feet down, my shovel struck something unexpected: a layer of what looked like charcoal briquettes. But irregular in shape, and oddly dense. Peat. Carbonized peat. I should have recognized it immediately, but the formation was unusual. Peat bogs required specific conditions: acidic water, low oxygen, consistent moisture. This highland terrain was all wrong for peat formation. Yet here it was. A thick layer of the stuff, burned black as coal. I extracted several chunks for examination under my hand lens. They showed the classic compressed plant matter structure of peat, but with an odd crystalline quality I'd never seen before. More intriguing were the impressions pressed into the softer sections, clear indentations that looked remarkably like footprints. human footprints. The scale was wrong, though, too small for adult feet. But the stride pattern suggested bipedal locomotion. I told myself they were just chance formations, the random impressions that nature creates when organic matter compresses over time. But they were detailed enough to show individual toe marks, heel strikes, even what appeared to be pressure ridges along the ball of each foot. I photographed everything methodically, documenting the depth, orientation, and characteristics of each impression. 12 distinct prints in the first piece alone, all seeming to move in the same direction, toward my cabin. That night, the smell was overwhelming. It rose through the floorboards like a living thing, thick enough to taste. I opened every window despite the cold, but the odor only grew stronger. For the first time since moving in, I felt genuinely uneasy. The house around me creaked and whispered with sounds I couldn't identify, and twice I could have sworn I heard something moving beneath the floor. I spent the following day expanding the excavation, driven by a combination of scientific curiosity and growing unease. The peat layer extended at least 20 feet in every direction, riddled with more of those impossible footprints. Some appeared fresh, the impressions sharp and well-defined. Others looked ancient, worn smooth by time and pressure. The strangest discovery came when I photographed the same section I'd documented the day before. The prints had moved. Not dramatically. A shift of perhaps an inch or two, but unmistakably different from my previous photos. The heel impression of one print had deepened, while the toe marks of another had become more pronounced. It was as if whatever had made them was still walking. Still pressing deeper into the earth. I told myself it was ground settling. Moisture changes. Natural compression. Peat was notoriously unstable, after all. But when I knelt to examine the prints more closely, I felt warmth radiating from the carbonized blocks. And the smell of burnt earth was so strong it made my eyes water. That evening I couldn't bring myself to build a fire. Instead I sat in the cold cabin, electric space heater humming, studying my photographs by lamplight. The progression was undeniable. The prints were changing. Shifting position day by day. More disturbing was the pattern I was beginning to see, they all led toward the exact spot where my cabin sat. I called the County Geological Survey office the next morning. Spoke to a young technician who sounded bored, until I mentioned the peat formation. "You sure it's peat?" she asked, suddenly alert. That whole area was surveyed in the 80s. No peat deposits on record. But I knew peat when I saw it. 43 years in geology had taught me to trust my eyes. I described the formations, the apparent age, the unusual crystalline structure. "Sir," she said carefully, "that land was a turf extraction site until about 15 years ago. Commercial peat mining. They pulled out maybe 40,000 tons before the operation shut down." Turfa. The Portuguese word for peat. Why did they shut down? A long pause. Equipment failures mostly. Machinery kept breaking down. Workers reported unusual conditions. Health department finally pulled their permits. After hanging up I sat staring at my excavation through the kitchen window. Commercial peat extraction would explain the deposits, but not their current condition. Extracted peat left behind mud and water, not intact formations. And it certainly didn't explain the footprints. I spent the afternoon in town, researching property records at the municipal office. The land had indeed been mined for 15 years, until 2008. The operation employed dozens of workers and extracted vast quantities of peat for agricultural use. But the records were oddly incomplete, missing reports from the final 2 years. Gaps in production data. No clear explanation for the shutdown. The elderly clerk who helped me search through the files grew increasingly uncomfortable as I asked more questions. Strange business, that mine, she finally admitted. Workers kept quitting. Said the peat was restless. Made no sense, but you couldn't keep crews more than a few weeks. Restless? She shrugged, but her eyes avoided mine. Just talk. People said the extracted peat would move on its own. Settle back into the extraction sites overnight. Machinery would sink into solid ground between shifts. Foolishness, mostly. But as I drove home that evening, her words echoed in my mind. Restless peat. Ground that moved on its own. I thought about my self-extinguishing fires. The smell that seemed to rise from below. Those shifting footprints in my excavation. That night I dreamed of walking. Not my own walking. I was motionless in my bed, but the sensation of feet pressing into soft earth, of moving through darkness beneath the ground, was vivid. In the dream I could feel the weight of soil above me, the pressure of roots and stones, and the foundations of my cabin. I was part of something larger. Something that had been compressed and burned and extracted but never truly removed. I woke to the smell of burnt earth so strong it made me gag. The house was shaking slightly, a rhythmic tremor that seemed to come from deep underground. Through my bedroom window, I could see my excavation in the moonlight, and the dark shapes moving within it. They looked like people at first glance, but something was wrong in their proportions and movement. Too fluid. As if made of the earth itself. They moved through the peat layer like swimmers, surfacing and submerging in the carbonized soil. As I watched, frozen in my bed, one of them turned toward the cabin. Its face was a smooth impression in dark earth, featureless except for two deep hollows where eyes might be. I blinked, and they were gone. The excavation lay still and empty in the moonlight. Just disturbed earth and shadows. But the tremor continued. And now I could hear it clearly, a rhythmic pressing, like footsteps, coming from directly beneath the cabin. The sound continued until dawn, then faded with the first light. When I finally worked up the courage to check the excavation, I found it filled with what looked like fresh footprints, all leading up from the peat layer toward my foundation. I stood at the edge of that hole for an hour, camera in hand, documenting everything. The prints were larger now, more defined, and unmistakably human in shape. But they emerged from solid peat, as if their makers had walked through stone to reach the surface. The rational part of my mind insisted on geological explanations, ground settling, thermal expansion, moisture migration. But 43 years of fieldwork had taught me to recognize phenomena that fell outside normal parameters. Whatever was happening here defied conventional geology. I spent the morning researching historical records online, searching for any mention of unusual geological activity in the Sao Hiam region. Most sources described typical highland formations, granite bedrock, well-drained soils, normal sedimentary processes. But buried in an obscure academic paper from 1987, I found a brief mention of anomalous organic formations discovered during the initial peat survey. The paper's author, Dr. Maria Santos, had noted unprecedented preservation of organic impressions in carbonized material, and thermal activity inconsistent with known geological processes. Her research had been cut short when the commercial extraction began, and she'd apparently never published follow-up studies. I managed to track down her contact information through the university directory. She was retired now, living in Porto Alegre. But when I called and mentioned the Sao Hiam peat deposits, her response was immediate. "You're living on that land?" Her voice carried an urgency that made my stomach tighten. "How long have you been there?" 3 weeks. "Have you disturbed the soil? Dug anything?" I described my well excavation, the peat formations, the footprints. The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the connection had failed. "Dr. Santos?" "Leave," she said quietly. "Leave immediately. Don't try to fill the excavation. Don't disturb anything else. Just go." "I don't understand. That peat isn't natural. It's preserved organic matter, but not from plants. The thermal carbonization process, it shouldn't be possible under normal conditions. Whatever created those formations is still active." She hung up before I could ask more questions. I stood in my kitchen, phone still in hand, watching my excavation through the window. In daylight, it looked harmless enough, just a hole in the ground filled with dark earth. But as I watched, I noticed movement. Subtle at first, like heat shimmer, but becoming more distinct. The peat layer was shifting. Flowing. Like thick liquid. And new impressions were forming on the surface. I grabbed my camera and rushed outside. Through the telephoto lens, I could see them clearly, fresh footprints appearing in the peat as I watched. As if invisible feet were walking through the carbonized material. They moved in deliberate patterns. Circling the excavation. Then heading straight toward my cabin. The prints stopped at the foundation. I spent that afternoon in town, ostensibly shopping for supplies, but really avoiding my own property. When I finally returned at sunset, I found new disturbances around the cabin's perimeter. The ground near the foundation looked churned. As if something. The ground near the foundation looked churned. As if something had been moving just beneath the surface. Dark stains marked the wooden skirting, and the smell of burnt earth was stronger than ever. That night I didn't even attempt to sleep in the cabin. I rolled out my sleeping bag in the truck bed, doors locked, engine running for heat. Through the windshield, I watched my property with a mixture of fascination and growing dread. The activity began just after midnight. At first, just small movements in the excavation, ripples in the peat layer like something large swimming beneath the surface. Then the ground around the cabin began to bulge and settle in rhythmic patterns. Whatever was down there was moving, pressing upward, testing the boundaries between the buried world and the surface. Around 2 a.m., I saw them clearly for the first time. They emerged from the excavation like swimmers breaking the surface of a lake, but the medium they moved through was solid earth. Human-shaped but wrong in their proportions. Made of compressed peat and carbon and something else I couldn't identify. They moved with purpose, circling the cabin, pressing against the foundation with their earthen hands. I wanted to start the truck and drive away, but some part of me, the scientist, the geologist who'd spent decades seeking rational explanations, needed to understand what I was witnessing. I pulled out my camera, hands shaking, and began documenting. Through the telephoto lens, I could see details that made my rational mind rebel. Their faces were impressions in dark earth, but they moved and shifted like living tissue. Their bodies flowed between solid and liquid states, dense as stone one moment, fluid as mud the next. They pressed against my cabin's foundation with increasing urgency, as if trying to push upward from below. The wooden structure began to settle. Not collapse, just sinking slowly into the earth, as if the ground beneath was becoming liquid. The porch steps tilted at odd angles, and I could hear windows cracking from the structural stress. By dawn, they had retreated back into the excavation, leaving behind only disturbed earth and the certainty that my cabin was now several inches lower than it had been the night before. I sat in my truck until full sunlight, then approached the excavation with scientific determination. The peat layer had changed again, new formations rising from the depths like fossilized memories. The footprints were everywhere now, overlapping in complex patterns, all leading to and from the space beneath my cabin. I knelt at the edge of the hole and felt warmth radiating from the carbonized earth. Not the warmth of decomposition or geothermal activity, but something else, the warmth of life, of movement, of something vast and patient waiting just below the surface. The rational explanation was clear now, though it violated everything I knew about geology and physics. This wasn't just peat. It was preserved organic matter from something much older. Something that had been compressed and carbonized but never truly died. The commercial extraction had disturbed a formation that existed in some state between life and fossilization, between past and present. And now it was trying to reclaim what had been taken. I spent the morning packing essentials, loading my truck with clothes and important documents. Dr. Santos was right, I needed to leave. But as I prepared to abandon the cabin, I faced the question that had haunted me since discovering the footprints. Should I fill the excavation, try to contain whatever was down there? Or leave it open, and risk letting something I didn't understand emerge fully into the world above? Filling it might trap the formation, force it to find other ways to reach the surface. But leaving it open felt like an invitation. I stood at the edge of my excavation, shovel in hand, feeling the warmth rise from the peat layer below. The impressions shifted as I watched, new footprints forming in patterns that seemed almost like communication, urgent, insistent, reaching upward toward the light. Behind me, my cabin continued its slow descent into earth that was no longer solid, no longer quite separate from the living formation beneath. The smell of burnt earth filled the air. And I could hear movement below. Not the random settling of soil, but the deliberate motion of something that had been compressed and extracted and burned, but had never truly stopped walking. The question remained. Should I bury it again? Or bear witness to what it's become? The question remained. Should I bury it again? Or bear witness to what it's become? What was I supposed to do with this knowledge? Was this a geological phenomenon that needed scientific study, or something that should remain buried? The footprints in the peat seemed to pulse with warmth as I watched, and for a moment I could swear I felt the ground beneath my own feet respond. As if the earth itself was preparing to welcome me into its compressed and carbonized embrace. I set down the shovel and walked back to my truck, leaving the excavation open behind me. Some mysteries, I realized, were meant to remain unsolved. Some depths, better left unexplored. Whether what I'd witnessed was real or the product of isolation and an aging mind, I could no longer trust myself to make that distinction. As I drove away, I watched my cabin in the rearview mirror, still settling into earth that moved like water. Like memory. Like something that had been waiting decades for someone to dig deep enough to find it. The last thing I saw before the trees blocked my view was movement in the excavation. Dark shapes emerging from the peat. Standing upright in the sunlight. Turning their impression faces toward the retreating sound of my truck. I never went back. To discover whether they ever fully emerged. Whether the cabin eventually disappeared completely into that living ground. Or whether the whole experience was simply the product of too much solitude and a mind unprepared for retirement. Some questions, I've learned, carry answers too heavy for rational thought to bear. But sometimes, on warm nights, when the earth seems to breathe beneath my feet, wherever I am now, I remember the smell of burnt earth and the warmth rising from compressed time. And I wonder if, somewhere near, those footprints are still walking through the dark peat. Still pressing upward toward a surface world they never quite managed to reach. Story 3, The Glass Twin. The first time I noticed him, I was reviewing quarterly reports on the 14th floor of the Millennium Building in downtown Belo Horizonte. The late afternoon sun cast harsh shadows through my office window, and across the narrow alley, the dark glass facade of the adjacent building reflected everything with unsettling clarity. That's when I saw myself, or what I thought was myself, staring back from the opposite window. Nothing unusual about seeing your own reflection. Except this one was wrong. Subtly, impossibly wrong. I raised my hand to adjust my tie, and the figure in the dark glass did the same, but a full second later. As if the image had to travel some impossible distance before reaching me. The delay was so brief, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. But something cold settled in my stomach. A primitive recognition that what I was seeing shouldn't exist. I work as a financial analyst for Meridian Accounting, spending my days buried in spreadsheets and client portfolios. Logic is my profession. Order, my obsession. Numbers don't lie. Patterns don't deceive. And reflections certainly don't operate on delays. Yet as I sat there, watching the figure across the alley mirror my movements with that unsettling lag, I felt the first hairline crack in my rational world. The building across from us housed another corporate complex, floors of identical offices with tinted windows so dark they were nearly opaque during the day. I'd worked here for 3 years and never seen movement behind that glass. Never noticed lights or signs of occupancy. The building seemed to swallow light rather than reflect it, creating a perfect black mirror that stretched up 12 stories. I leaned back in my chair, and my reflection did the same. One Mississippi later. I blinked, and the figure blinked back. After that same impossible pause, the fluorescent lights above my head flickered, casting stuttering shadows across my keyboard, and I felt a bead of sweat trace down my spine, despite the aggressive air conditioning. "You're losing it, Leandro," I whispered to myself. But even as I spoke, I couldn't look away from the window. The figure across the alley seemed to be watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. That evening, I mentioned the strange reflection to my colleague Marcus as we waited for the elevator. He glanced toward the windows with the practiced disinterest of someone who'd worked in corporate buildings too long. "Tinted glass can create weird visual effects," he said, pressing the down button repeatedly. "Heat distortion, light refraction, it happens all the time in these modern buildings." His explanation made perfect sense. But it didn't explain the delay. It didn't explain why I could feel eyes on me even when I wasn't looking at the window. And it certainly didn't explain what happened the next day. I arrived at the office early, before sunrise, hoping to finish the Henderson audit before the morning meetings. The building was nearly empty. Just the cleaning crew and a few other early arrivals scattered across 30 floors. I switched on my computer and fell into the familiar rhythm of spreadsheet analysis. But something kept pulling my attention to the window. Dawn was breaking over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the dark glass across the alley was beginning to catch the first rays of sunlight. As the light shifted, I saw him again. The figure in the opposite window. But this time, he was already there. Waiting. I hadn't moved yet. Hadn't given him anything to mirror. But he was standing at what looked like a desk, facing my direction. The early morning light made it easier to see details, and what I saw made my throat tighten. The figure wore the same blue shirt I had on. The same navy tie. Even the same silver watch on his left wrist. But his posture was different. More confident. More assertive than I'd ever felt in my life. As I watched, paralyzed by a fear I couldn't name, the figure raised his hand in a slow, deliberate wave. I didn't wave back. I couldn't. My hands were frozen on my keyboard, every muscle in my body locked in place. But the figure continued his gesture, completing the wave with what looked disturbingly like a smile. The rest of that morning passed in a haze of distraction. I made errors in calculations I could normally do in my sleep. Transposed numbers. Forgot to save files. During the lunch break, I called the property management company for the building across the alley, claiming I was interested in renting office space. The representative laughed. "That building's been vacant for 2 years," she told me. "Asbestos, remediation, structural issues. It's not even safe to enter." I hung up and stared across the alley at the dark windows. At the figure I could swear was still there. Still watching. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that deliberate wave. That impossible smile. I found myself checking my reflection in every mirror in my apartment. Searching for some sign that what I'd seen was real. Some evidence that I wasn't slowly losing my mind. The third day brought new horrors. Like he belonged there more than I belonged in mine. The access log showed more unauthorized entries. My key card was supposedly used 3 more times in the middle of the night, always during hours when I could prove I was elsewhere. I had dinner receipts, security camera footage for my apartment building, witnesses who could vouch for my whereabouts. But the logs didn't lie. And my key card never left my possession. I bought a small security camera and positioned it to monitor my office overnight. If someone was using my identity, if someone was somehow duplicating my key card, I would catch them. The camera recorded continuously, uploading footage to a cloud server every hour. The next morning, I reviewed the footage with shaking hands. The timestamp showed 11:52 p.m., just a few minutes after the access log indicated my key card had been used. The camera angle captured my desk, my chair, and the window behind it. In the video, I watched myself enter the frame. But it wasn't me. It couldn't be me. The figure moved with a confidence I'd never possessed, sat straighter in my chair than I ever had, typed with a fluid efficiency that made my own Hunt and Peck style look childish. He worked steadily for nearly 3 hours, occasionally glancing toward the camera with what looked like amusement, as if he knew I would be watching. Toward the end of the footage, the figure stopped typing and turned to face the window that looked out across the alley. He stared at the dark glass for a long moment, then slowly raised his hand and pressed it against the window. The gesture was oddly intimate, like someone touching their lover's face through a barrier. Then he turned back to the camera, looked directly into the lens, and smiled. It was my face. Undeniably my face. But the expression was wrong. Too knowing. Too satisfied. The smile of someone who had won a game I didn't even know I was playing. I deleted the footage immediately. Then sat staring at my computer screen for the rest of the morning. The logical explanations were exhaustive. Security glitches. Light distortions. Stress-induced hallucinations. None of them could account for the video. For the access logs. For the growing certainty that someone else was living pieces of my life. I started staying later at the office, trying to outlast whatever was happening. Trying to be there when the unauthorized access occurred. But every night I would eventually succumb to exhaustion and go home, and every morning, the logs would show another late-night visit. The figure across the alley was becoming bolder. More active. During meetings, I would catch glimpses of him pacing behind his window, gesticulating as if he were giving presentations to invisible colleagues. Sometimes he would stop and stare directly at me, raising his hand in that slow, deliberate wave that had become his signature greeting. My coworkers started asking if I was feeling well. My productivity had plummeted. My attention span reduced to minutes at a time. I found myself checking the window compulsively, monitoring the dark glass across the alley for signs of movement. For proof that I wasn't completely losing my mind. 2 weeks after it all started, I made a decision. I would confront whatever was happening. Would force some kind of resolution before I completely unraveled. I equipped myself with every recording device I could carry, phones, cameras, digital recorders, even an old Polaroid camera I'd bought at a pawn shop, thinking that maybe analog technology could capture what digital sensors missed. I arrived at the office before dawn and positioned myself at the window. The building across the alley was dark, seemingly empty, but I knew he was there. I could feel his presence like pressure in my ears, like the moment before thunder. As the sun rose and light began to creep across the glass facade, I saw him materialize in the opposite window. But this time, he wasn't at his desk. He was standing at his window, hands pressed against the glass, staring directly at me. Even at this distance, I could see his expression clearly. Not the confident smile I'd grown accustomed to, but something hungrier. More desperate. I raised my phone and started recording. Then grabbed the Polaroid and began taking pictures. Through my phone screen, I could see only empty windows. But the figure was right there, close enough that I could see the individual threads in his tie. The slight 5 o'clock shadow along his jaw. Close enough that I could see the individual threads in his tie. The slight 5 o'clock shadow along his jaw. The Polaroid whirred and dispensed photo after photo. I shook them impatiently, watching the images develop. Empty windows. Dark glass. Nothing. But when I looked up from the photos, the figure had moved closer to his window, so close that his breath was fogging the glass. He raised one hand and began tracing letters on the condensation, writing them backwards so I could read them from my side. HELPME. My phone slipped from my nerveless fingers and clattered to the floor. When I looked up again, the figure was gone. But the message remained on the window for a few more seconds before the condensation faded. I spent the rest of that day in a state of numb shock, going through the motions of work while my mind raced through every possible explanation. Hallucinations. Elaborate pranks. Some kind of sophisticated projection system. Nothing fit the evidence. That evening, I stayed in the office until well past midnight, determined to finally see what happened during those unauthorized visits. I hid behind my desk with a clear view of both the door and the window, every recording device I owned ready to capture whatever occurred. At 11:43 p.m., I heard the soft beep of a key card at the door. My heart hammered against my ribs as the handle turned and the door opened. I raised my phone to record, finger poised over the camera button. But no one entered. The door swung open on empty air, stayed open for exactly 4 minutes according to my watch, then closed with another soft beep. The access log would show an entry at 11:43. An exit at 11:47. But I had seen nothing. Yet something had changed. I could feel it in the air, a subtle shift in temperature, in pressure, in the quality of light from the window. When I finally worked up the courage to peek over my desk, I saw him clearly in the window across the alley. Not a reflection this time, but a figure standing in what should have been an empty, condemned building. He was looking directly at me, and this time his expression was unmistakably one of triumph. He raised his hand in that familiar wave. But now I understood, it wasn't a greeting. It was goodbye. The next morning, I arrived at the office to find my key card no longer worked. Security informed me that my employment had been terminated, effective immediately, due to unauthorized access and suspicious behavior. My supervisor, a woman I'd worked with for 2 years, looked at me with polite confusion when I tried to explain. "I'm sorry, but I don't believe we've met," she said. "Are you sure you have the right company?" I produced business cards. Showed her emails with her own name in the signature. Pulled up project files I'd created. But in her computer, all those files showed a different creator. A different author. Every trace of my work, my presence, my 3 years with the company had been systematically replaced. As security escorted me from the building, I looked up at my former office window on the 14th floor. A figure stood there, silhouetted against the glass, wearing a blue shirt and navy tie. He raised his hand in a wave. And this time I understood, I was looking up at myself. The self I should have been. The self I could have been, if I'd been more confident. More assertive. More deserving of the life I'd been living. The reflection had become real. And I had become the reflection. Now I stand across the alley, in what everyone insists is an empty building, though it feels solid enough beneath my feet. I watch him living my life. Attending my meetings. Dating the woman I'd been too shy to ask out. He's better at being me than I ever was. Sometimes, late at night, I see someone else at a window in another building. Someone who looks lost and confused and desperate. When they notice me watching, I press my hand against the glass and trace letters in the condensation. HELPME. But they never seem to understand. They never realize they're looking at themselves. Story 4, The Leather Chair. The leather still smells like him. Pipe tobacco. Old Spice. And something older beneath, varnish, perhaps, or the oil from his skin. A scent that should comfort but instead makes my stomach clench. Dad's chair sits in my apartment now. It occupies the corner where my reading lamp used to cast gentle light. But the shadows are deeper there now. Thicker. They pool around the worn burgundy leather like dark water. I inherited the chair 3 weeks ago. Along with the house where I grew up. And a collection of things no one else wanted, books with brittle spines, loose photographs curled at the corners, and this chair, which I moved into my apartment against my better judgment. I thought it would make me feel close to him. Instead, I feel watched. The first night, I placed it by the window and sat in it, letting the memories come. Dad reading aloud. Dad falling asleep with a book on his chest. Dad smoking in silence, staring out at the yard as if listening for something just beyond the fence line. I fell asleep in the chair. I woke sometime after midnight, the apartment dark but for the streetlight glow leaking through the blinds. I was cold. My neck stiff. But worse than that was the smell. Stronger now. Not just the faint remnants of his life, but the scent of leather warming beneath a body. Only I was standing up. And the chair was still warm. I told myself it held heat well, that I hadn't been out of it for more than a few seconds. I convinced myself. Until the next night. I didn't sit in it. I watched it. And around 2 a.m., the leather creaked. The same sound it always made when Dad leaned back, elbows on armrests, the shifting weight of his frame settling deep into the cushions. But no one was there. The third night, I moved the chair to the opposite corner. In the morning, it had returned to the window. I live alone. That day I burned incense. Smudged the corners with sage like the internet suggested. I placed a crucifix above the chair and poured salt in a ring around its wooden legs. At midnight, I watched from the hallway. The shadows in the room deepened again, like something drawing breath. The salt didn't move, but the light inside the ring dimmed, as if absorbed. The crucifix fell from the wall without sound. And the chair rocked. Just once. A slow, deliberate motion. Like someone settling in for a long sit. I haven't slept since. But I've started to remember. Not the good memories. Not Christmas mornings or bedtime stories. Something else. The nights when I would wake to find Dad already awake, sitting in the chair, watching me. But his face wasn't right. His expression, empty. Like the shell of a man who'd stepped out, leaving something else behind. I'd forgotten those nights. Or maybe I'd suppressed them. But now, every time I close my eyes, I see that face again, half in shadow, half lit by the hallway nightlight. Not angry. Not sad. Just patient. Like it's still waiting. And the chair creaks. Every night. Whether I'm watching it or not. I thought about getting rid of it. Burning it. Donating it. But every time I touch the wood, I get the sense that I'd just be passing it along. Giving someone else the waiting. The watching. So now, I sit. In the other room. Lights on. TV playing something loud and bright. And I try not to listen to the chair. Because I know it's not empty. And I'm starting to wonder if Dad ever really left it behind. Story 5. The Bone Hunger. They told us the house had been built on a battlefield, but the way they said it made it sound romantic. Noble, even. A place of legacy, of heritage. We should have known better. We moved in during the spring, my husband, our 2 boys, and me. The realtor called it a restoration marvel, a Civil War era farmhouse brought back from ruin with reclaimed wood and period-accurate fixtures. The backyard sloped into a tree-lined ridge, and beyond that, the forgotten edge of a once contested hill. It was beautiful. It was quiet. It was wrong. The first sign came from the dog. We hadn't planned on getting one, but the boys begged. So we brought home Jasper, a shaggy, joyful rescue mutt who took to the yard like it had been waiting for him. But he refused to go near the base of the ridge. He'd bark at it sometimes, growling, hair raised, tail tucked. Sometimes he'd whine, low and trembling, staring into the trees as if waiting for something to come out. We joked it was raccoons. Then came the bones. At first, it was a single fragment, unearthed by a spring rain, washed into the grass like a white root. I thought it was from an animal until I noticed the porous texture, the human curvature. I buried it again. A week later, more surfaced. Tiny finger bones like broken twigs. A jaw fragment with teeth still in place. The boys found one near the tire swing. They thought it was from a dinosaur. I didn't correct them. I started hearing the digging after that. Soft at first. Scrapes and thuds in the night. I thought it was Jasper, until I found him curled in the laundry room, shivering and whining while the sounds continued outside. I went to the ridge with a flashlight and shovel. I should not have. The earth gave easily, too easily. Like it wanted to be open. I dug maybe 2 feet before I hit something solid. It wasn't wood. Not rock. Something harder. Smoother. I scraped gently with my hands and uncovered a skull. Not weathered. Not old. Clean. White. Fresh. I screamed. Called the sheriff. The investigation lasted 2 weeks. They roped off half the yard, brought in a team. Dozens of remains were found, unmarked, undocumented, not from any recorded cemetery or grave. The official report said they were likely historical, casualties of an undocumented skirmish. But I knew better. They were too fresh. Too recent. The dreams began that night. I was in the yard, barefoot, the grass wet with dew and something thicker. I could feel it, slipping between my toes. The earth opened in patches as I walked, revealing sockets and teeth. Hands reaching up. Not to grab. To beg. They were hungry. Not for food. For memory. For return. Each morning I'd wake to mud on my sheets. Dirt under my nails. Once, a molar on my pillow. My husband thought I was sleepwalking. I knew I wasn't. The boys began to change. Not in obvious ways, no spinning heads or ancient voices, but subtly. Quietly. My youngest stopped laughing. My oldest spoke of soldiers no one else could see. They both began to spend hours at the ridge, sitting in silence, heads tilted as if listening. I followed once, unseen. They were humming. In unison. A tune I didn't recognize, but that chilled me to the marrow. Then the digging resumed. But not by me. Not by any of us. Each morning, new holes would appear. Perfect circles. Precise. And inside each, a single bone, freshly unearthed, placed upright like a monument. I started keeping them. I don't know why. A box under the bed. Lined in velvet. Sealed with tape I swore never to remove. But at night, I'd dream of the box opening. Of the bones dancing in the moonlight. Of them whispering. My husband said we should leave. I agreed. But the house did not. The night before our planned departure, the ridge erupted. Dozens of holes. Dozens of bones. Laid out like an offering, or a warning. Jasper ran into the woods and never came back. The boys stood at the window, watching with expressions far too old for their faces. We stayed. I don't remember why. I just know we never left. Now I sit in the kitchen each night, counting the new holes. One for each forgotten name. One for each meal the earth demands. The house is quiet, save for the rhythmic tapping, tiny bones against the floorboards, echoing up from beneath. It is not a haunting. It is a hunger. And it is patient. Story 6, The Room That Remembers. It was only meant to be temporary. The apartment on Delaney Street was just a stopgap, a 2-month sublet while I sorted out a broken lease and the fallout from a life that had abruptly shifted under my feet. It was sparsely furnished when I arrived, with minimalist mid-century decor, wide windows facing an alley, and walls painted the color of old milk. Clean enough. Quiet. Just what I needed. Until it began to remember. At first, it was small things. The bathroom mirror was fogged when I came home from work, despite no one using the shower. My toothbrush was damp. A glass I never used sat in the drying rack, wet. I assumed the previous tenant still had a key. I changed the locks. Double-checked the windows. Set up a camera in the hallway. But the recordings showed nothing. Then came the music. Soft, old-fashioned, a woman singing jazz standards, her voice distant, as if carried through walls that had once known joy. I could never find the source. The radio was off. My phone silent. The neighbors claimed not to hear a thing. I tried to ignore it. But the music grew louder with each passing day. Accompanied by smells, lilac perfume, cigarette smoke, baking bread. It felt less like a haunting and more like someone else's life brushing up against mine. Echoes of a past that clung to the room like scent to fabric. The mirror changed next. One morning, I caught sight of movement, not my reflection, but someone behind me. A woman in a housecoat, hair in curlers, humming to herself. When I spun around, the room was empty. I stopped sleeping. Then, one evening, I came home to find everything moved. Furniture rearranged, photographs on the walls that hadn't been there before. A child's drawing pinned to the fridge. A grocery list in unfamiliar handwriting. I ran. But the next apartment felt wrong, too. Blank. Empty in a way that wasn't peaceful, but barren. Soulless. I returned to Delaney Street. The door was still unlocked. The air smelled like lilacs and coffee. The light through the window fell just right across the arm of the couch. The radio played softly in the background, a song I remembered from childhood, though I couldn't name it. The apartment welcomed me. And I realized something then. It didn't remember me. It remembered someone. Someone who had loved. Who had danced barefoot on those floors. Who had cooked and sung and wept and lived within those walls. And somehow, the room had absorbed it all. Stored it. Replayed it. Maybe not for me. Maybe to keep itself from forgetting. Some spaces do not want to be left behind. So I stayed. Now, sometimes, I catch glimpses of her in the mirror. I hear the child laughing in the other room. Smell fresh cinnamon rolls in the oven that hasn't worked in years. I leave the radio on. I let the room remember. And, on the loneliest nights, I pretend it remembers me too. Story 7, The Scrapbook. It arrived without warning. No return address. Just a brown paper parcel on my doorstep one morning, damp from the fog, tied with old twine. Inside was a leather-bound scrapbook, brittle and dusty, the corners frayed with time. The first page had my name written in blue ink. My full name, middle included. No one ever used my middle name. I didn't open it right away. Something about the texture of the cover made my skin crawl. Like it was covered in skin that remembered being touched too many times. Eventually, curiosity overpowered dread. I sat at my kitchen table and turned the first page. It was a photograph of me. Or at least, it looked like me. But the background was wrong. It showed a house I didn't recognize. A different haircut. A scar on the cheek I never had. Each page was the same. Photographs of a life similar to mine, but subtly off. In one, I was smiling beside a woman I've never met. In another, holding a child I've never had. My eyes in each were familiar, but the smiles didn't reach them. The light inside them was dimmer. I kept turning pages. One showed me standing beside a headstone with my own name on it. Another showed me sleeping. But I hadn't been asleep when the photo was taken. I remembered that shirt. I wore it last week. And that was my apartment. My current one. The next page was blank. The one after that too. And then, a new photo appeared as I watched. I swear to you, it developed as I held the book open, like old Polaroid film, slowly coming to life. It was me. Right then. Sitting at the kitchen table. Holding the scrapbook. Behind me, in the doorway, stood a figure. Tall. Blurred. Watching. I slammed the book shut and threw it across the room. It landed with a sickening thud. Like something alive had hit the floor. I didn't sleep that night. I left every light on. Moved the book into the hallway. Tried to convince myself it was a prank. An art project. Some weird coincidence. In the morning, it was back on the kitchen table. Turned to a new page. Me, sleeping again. And the figure, closer. I tried burning it. I really did. The fire went out. Twice. The third time, the flames danced around the book but never touched it. Like they recognized it. Revered it. Or feared it. Now it just waits. On the table. Or the couch. Or sometimes, the foot of my bed. Each morning, a new page. Sometimes I try not to look. But I always do. And I've learned not to look too long. Because the longer I stare, the more I remember things I never lived. Moments from those other lives. Bits of grief that aren't mine. A child's laugh I can almost hear. A lover's name I never spoke, still caught on the tip of my tongue. The book isn't just showing me what could have been. It's trying to make me remember it. All of it. And every night, the figure gets closer. Last night, it stood beside my bed. The photo caught it reaching toward my face. I'm afraid tonight it will touch me. And I wonder. When it does, will I still remember this life? Or just become another page in the book? Story 8, The Room That Wasn't There. It started with a doorway I didn't remember. I'd lived in this apartment for 6 years. A top-floor unit in an aging brownstone that creaked when it settled and ran hot even in winter. I knew every inch of it, every crack in the plaster, every warped floorboard, every stubborn drawer that refused to stay shut. But that morning, there was a door in the hallway between the kitchen and the bedroom that hadn't been there the day before. It looked like it had always belonged. Same paint. Same hardware. No fresh cuts in the trim. No sign of renovation. Just a closed door where there had never been one. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, maybe a dream hangover from the melatonin I'd taken the night before. But I reached out, half expecting my hand to pass through it. It was solid. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I stood there for several minutes, staring at the brass knob, my fingertips hovering just above the surface. A single fly buzzed lazily in the hallway light, tapping against the glass shade above my head. Eventually, I laughed at myself. Maybe the landlord had started some bizarre renovation without telling me. Maybe there had been a closet I'd somehow never noticed, hidden behind the old bookshelf I'd finally moved last week. I opened the door. Behind it was a narrow set of stairs, descending into darkness. That was the first impossibility. I lived on the top floor. There was nothing above me but roof. And yet, here were stairs going up, or rather, down, if direction even made sense in this moment. The air that came through the doorway was cool and dry, like the inside of a long-forgotten attic. It smelled faintly of dust, paper, and something else, something floral and decaying. Like wilted lilies left too long in a vase. I closed the door. And for a while, I pretended it hadn't happened. That night, I pushed a chair in front of it. The next morning, the chair had moved. Not far. Just a few inches off center. Like someone had nudged it to get through. The door was still closed. I checked the hallway for dust, cobwebs, fingerprints, any sign that something had passed. But everything looked untouched. I opened the door again. The stairs were still there. The scent was stronger. And this time, I heard something. A faint, slow creaking, like footsteps on wood. Not constant, just one, maybe 2 steps. Then silence. Then, further down, another. As if someone were walking in a circle. Or pacing. I closed the door again. Locked it, even though I didn't remember installing a lock. It clicked satisfyingly. That should have been the end of it. But over the next few days, things changed. Subtly, at first. Small objects in my apartment shifted places when I wasn't looking. My coffee mug appeared in the bathroom. A sock I was certain had been in the dryer ended up folded neatly on the arm of the couch. My phone played voicemails I hadn't received, just static and what sounded like a faint voice whispering my name. Then, one night, I woke to the sound of the door opening. Not loudly. Just a soft creak and a click. My bedroom was dark, save for the ambient city light leaking through the curtains. I listened. Heard nothing. Then a slow, measured step on the hallway floor outside my room. I stayed still, barely breathing. Another step. Then silence. I turned on the lamp. The hallway was empty. The door to the unknown room stood open. Beyond it, only darkness and stairs. This time, I didn't close it. I got up, walked to the threshold, and looked inside. The air was cooler again. Not cold. Not malevolent. Just, patient. Like something that had been waiting. I stepped onto the first stair. It groaned under my weight. I descended slowly. Each step was wooden but dustless, smooth like it had been worn down by many feet. The walls were bare lath, and the air thickened as I went, pressing in like a velvet glove. At the bottom was a room. Small. Square. Lit by a single, flickering bulb that hung from a cord in the ceiling. The walls were lined with furniture I recognized, but not from my apartment. From my childhood. There was the armchair my mother used to read in. The bookshelf that had collapsed when I was 9. A faded rug with a red wine stain that had never come out. It was my old living room, precisely recreated. But wrong, somehow. As if reassembled from memory by someone who'd never seen it in daylight. I took a step inside. The bulb flared and dimmed. The door at the top of the stairs slammed shut. And then I heard it. Breathing. Not mine. From the corner of the room, just beyond the reach of the light. I called out. No answer. Only breathing. Wet, shuddering, unsteady. Like someone trying not to be noticed. I backed toward the stairs, but they were no longer behind me. Just wall. The room had shifted. The breathing grew closer. I turned in time to see something emerge from the shadows. A shape. Not quite human. Wearing my mother's sweater. But the face was a blur, like a photo in motion, features in the wrong places. I screamed. The light bulb burst. When I woke, I was back in my bed. The door in the hallway was gone. I thought I'd dreamed it. Until I saw the footprint on my bedroom floor. A wet, dusty impression. Small. Familiar. And pointed toward the bed. Whatever was reaching through the chair, through the walls, through memory, needed me to understand. So I gave in. Each night, I returned willingly to the leather seat that no longer smelled like my father but like something older, deeper. Like soil after rain. Like paper left in a damp attic. Like breath exhaled in grief. The arms came faster now. Not gradual, not coaxing. They pulled. They held. And each night I sank deeper, not just into sleep, but into some layered place between memory and message, between past and presence. That's when the room appeared. Not in the physical apartment. Not at first. But in dreams. A room that hadn't been in the house I grew up in, a space tucked behind my father's study, a place I'd never seen in waking life. Small, square, with no windows. Lined wall to wall in shelves. Each shelf holding rows of identical black notebooks. And in the center, a single chair, his chair. Each dream was the same. I entered the room. Saturday. Waited. The light would dim, then bloom, as if passing through clouds. And across from me, my father would appear. Never walking. Just there. His lips moved. His hands gestured. He pointed at the notebooks, at the walls, at me. But the sound never came. I tried bringing one of the dream notebooks back with me once. Clutched it as tightly as I could in the final moments before waking. But when I sat up, gasping in my apartment, my hands were wrapped around nothing but air. Except, the pages of my real notebooks, my waking notebooks, had changed. Some filled with entries I never remembered writing. Long passages in my father's handwriting. Full pages describing moments from his life I had no knowledge of. His regrets. His confessions. Memories I should not have. I checked them against his actual journals. The ones I'd inherited. And to my horror, the words matched. Exactly. Word for word. Passages he'd written decades ago were now appearing in my handwriting, in my new journals. But only after the dreams. The wall was almost completely black now. A chaos of messages scratched and struck and rewritten. The palimpsest had become a labyrinth. And still I sat. And still the arms held me. And still the chair remembered. On the 34th night, I didn't dream. I woke in the hidden room. The chair was beneath me. The notebook surrounded me. And this time, my father wasn't across from me. He was behind me. I turned, slowly, as if underwater, and there he stood. Not as I remembered him, not as the younger dream version. But older. Frilier. The man he was the year before he died. His hands trembled. His eyes were red-rimmed and pleading. And for the first time, I heard his voice. Only one sentence. Only once. I need you to finish what I couldn't. Then I woke. To silence. To an empty apartment. To a chair that smelled only of leather. The wall behind it was blank. Perfect white. No markings. No scratches. No layers. The notebooks were gone. All of them. I've searched the whole apartment. Every drawer. Every cabinet. Nothing. Just the chair. Sitting by the window. Still turned slightly inward. Still waiting. I haven't sat in it since. But I still hear it creak, sometimes. Not every night. Just when I try to forget. And in the silence, I sometimes hear his voice again. One line. Repeating like a skipped record. Finish what I couldn't. I don't know what it means. But I know this, the chair isn't done with me. And that room? That room wasn't a dream. That room is still there. Waiting. Somewhere just past the edge of sleep. Story 9, The Listening House. The house was quiet. Not in the way all old houses are quiet, but in the way an anechoic chamber is quiet. Smothering. Perfect. Absolute. Eli noticed at the first moment he stepped through the warped oak door, the way his boots made no sound on the wooden floorboards, how even his breath seemed hushed. The sea wind that howled all the way up the coast went still the second it passed the threshold, like sound itself had agreed not to enter. The house had belonged to his uncle, a man he'd never met. They'd exchanged letters once, years ago, about nothing of importance. A single sentence from that letter returned to him now, unbidden. This house records everything, even silence. The property was left to Eli in the will. No one else wanted it. He'd driven 8 hours from the city to this stretch of jagged coast, half to settle the paperwork and half because he didn't quite know where else to go. The studio had let him go. Contracts had dried up. Sound was supposed to be his world, and yet here he was, welcomed by a void. He walked room to room, testing the acoustics with soft claps and throat clearing. Nothing bounced back. No echo. No warmth. The walls swallowed everything. He checked his equipment just to be sure. His recorder blinked red, then green. Operational. He spoke into it. Testing. Testing. 1, 2, 3. Playback yielded nothing. Just the sound of a machine that had no memory. In the basement, he found the tapes. Hundreds of them. Reels stacked in metal drawers, each labeled meticulously with dates and times. They spanned decades. But no indication of contents. Just labels like March 18, 72, 11:34 p.m. or July 4, 89, 3:01 a.m. He found the old reel-to-reel player behind a false panel in the study. It took him the better part of the night to clean the heads, restring the belts, and oil the mechanics. Around 2 a.m., he played the first tape. It was empty. Then, faintly, beneath the hum of the aged machine, a voice. His uncle. If you're listening to this, you already know. The house doesn't echo. It remembers. Not like us. Not in the way we forget in self-defense. It remembers exactly. The voice broke off. Then came another. Eli's own. But younger. A child. Uncle. I'm scared. It's too quiet. He stopped the tape. Stared at it. That conversation had never happened. Not in his memory. The days blurred after that. Eli catalogued, cleaned, restored. More tapes. More impossibilities. He heard his own voice speaking words he had never spoken. His dreams began to echo with audio he'd only just discovered. Sometimes he'd wake with sentences in his head, only to find them waiting on the next reel. The house didn't just remember. It played things forward. Or sideways. One night, he found a door he hadn't noticed before. Behind it, a room lined with cork and black foam, a single chair in the center, and a microphone dangling from the ceiling. No tape player. No speakers. Just the microphone, humming softly with live signal. He sat. Just for a moment. The chair was warm. He leaned forward, spoke his name. Silence. Then a whisper, in his uncle's voice. You're not the first to sit here. You won't be the last. The recordings became clearer after that. Not on tape, but in the house itself. A laugh from behind a door. His own voice humming in the kitchen when he hadn't spoken all day. Footsteps upstairs. Always in threes. He began to record everything. Day and night. His devices filled with hours of nothing, punctuated by impossible conversations. One morning, he played back an overnight file. A conversation. His uncle, you have to finish it. Eli, finish what? Uncle, the arrangement. The final track. Before the house forgets us both. He worked for days without sleep, arranging sounds from the tapes, editing fragments of conversations and ambient hush into something resembling music. The final track looped with a cadence that felt familiar. Like breathing. Like the ocean, if the ocean had a memory. When he played it through the old speakers in the studio room, the house seemed to vibrate in harmony. Then silence. Not the dead silence from before. This was full. A silence that held breath. Potential. That night, he sat in the listening room again. I finished it, he said. No response. But when he turned, he saw someone sitting in the chair across from him. His uncle. Or the idea of him. Smiling. Listening. Eli never left the house. Not physically. People say the property is vacant now. Condemned. Locals avoid it. The few who approach say there's no sound. Not even birdsong. But sometimes, if you stand close enough, you can hear breathing. And if you're very quiet, the whisper of a tape rewinding. And that was tonight's whisper. But the night never truly ends. Not here. If something still lingers in your thoughts. If your room feels a little too quiet now. Don't worry. There are many more whispers waiting. Just subscribe. And I'll be here. the next time darkness calls. Sleep well. And if you hear a soft knock at your door, pretend you're already asleep.